They always say to trust your instincts. Funny thing is, sometimes it takes a lifetime of knowing when not to before you realize when you finally should. I spent 40 years in law enforcement, 30 of those as a detective. Worked homicide, narcotics, some crimes. Saw more dark corners of the human condition than most men could stomach. And through it all, I built my edge on one simple truth. Details never lie. People do. My wife, Helen, used to say the same thing. She was sharp. Smarter than me, if I'm honest. A criminal psychologist with a reputation for surgical precision in courtrooms. Judges loved her poise. Juries hung on her words. Lawyers paid handsomely for her testimony. We met on a case 25 years ago. I caught the killer. She explained him to the jury. It worked. For a while, so did we. Marriage between two people who dissect lies for a living isn't always easy. But we made it work. Or so I thought. Until one night, 4 months ago. It was late. One of those insomniac nights where I couldn't settle. I poured a whiskey, wandered down the hall, and heard her in the study. The door was cracked open. Her voice drifted out. He was under immense stress. The need for validation overrode his usual controls. I frowned. Unusual phrasing, almost too intimate. It wasn't about malice. It was about survival. About longing. Her tone wasn't clinical. It was soft. Personal. I stayed in the shadows, listening. No audio recorder. Just my own ears, trained by decades. When she finally finished and left the room, I waited. Then slipped inside. The trash can caught my eye. A torn note, not in her handwriting. I can't wait until the trial is over and we're finally free. No signature. I stood there, blood slowing. She wasn't practicing for a case. She was practicing a cover story. And my instincts, dulled by years of routine, of trust, finally snapped awake. From that moment, I was no longer her husband. I was an investigator again. And this time, the case was personal. I started old school. No fancy tech. No hacking. Just the tools that had kept me alive for decades. First, I built the calendar. Helen was testifying in the state's biggest corruption trial of the year, State versus Malcolm Crane. Crane was a high-profile developer facing massive fraud and racketeering charges. Defense attorney? James Rollins. A slick operator. Defense legend. Known for winning the impossible. I'd crossed paths with him before. Didn't like him. Didn't trust him. Now my gut told me he was more than Helen's courtroom adversary. I began watching. No tailing her in the car, too easy to spook her. I used routine. She had a pattern. Monday and Wednesday prep sessions with the DA's team. Tuesday and Friday, private study days. It was those Tuesdays and Fridays I followed. First week, nothing. Second week, a change. Friday afternoon, she didn't head to her usual coffee shop. She took a detour, down toward the Eastwood district. I followed at a safe distance. She parked near the Artisan Lofts. Swiped a key fob at the side entrance. Rollins had a unit there. I knew it from a prior case. I waited. 3 hours. When she emerged, hair tousled, jacket buttoned wrong, my instincts stopped screaming and simply settled. Confirmed. No doubts. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof. Ironclad. So I staked it out again twice more. Each time, the same pattern. Same entrance. Same 3-hour window. I shot photos. Logged timestamps. Then came the jackpot. A week before final arguments, I caught them slipping out together, laughing. Too casual for two supposed courtroom adversaries. More photos. The next move was riskier, but necessary. I leaned on an old friend from surveillance, ex-tech guy from Vice. We planted a discreet recorder in the hallway vent near Rollins's unit. Legal? Not entirely. But the goal wasn't to prosecute, it was to expose. 2 days later, I had what I needed. You know I shouldn't be testifying against you, Helen's voice whispered. I hate every minute of it. But once it's over, once we win, it's done. We'll be free. Rollins replied. Soon, baby. One more hurdle. Just sell the story. The jury buys you. We buy freedom. That was enough. The final play needed precision. I compiled the photos, the transcripts, the calendar. Then I prepared 2 packages. One, anonymous, to the presiding judge. One to the state bar. Timing was everything. Final arguments were set for Friday. I scheduled delivery for Thursday morning, just as the courtroom buzz reached its peak. Because exposing betrayal isn't about vengeance. It's about timing. And after 40 years of chasing truth, I knew exactly when to strike. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray-fitting. I sat in my den at 6:30 a.m., steaming black coffee in hand, watching the clock tick toward the first scheduled delivery window. I'd sent the 2 packages out the night before. Paid cash, no traceable origin, no signature required. Old habits. 1 package addressed to the presiding judge of state versus Malcolm Crane, the Honorable Judith Merriman, a stickler for courtroom ethics and professional conduct. The other to the State Bar's Ethics Committee, the body that governed attorney behavior, and by extension, any experts who collaborated with them. Inside each package, photographs of Helen entering and leaving James Rollins' loft. Surveillance timestamps, logged and cross-referenced with her sworn court schedule. Transcripts of their recorded conversation, Helen explicitly acknowledging her relationship with Rollins and intent to manipulate her testimony. No letter, no commentary, just facts. Let the evidence speak for itself. By 7:15, both packages were signed for courier receipts confirmed. Now the waiting began. The day moved slow. I did what any retired cop would do when anticipation gnawed the gut. Went about the routine. Hit the gym. Ran the dog. Read the paper. Made lunch. But under the calm, my pulse hummed steady, because I knew how this would unfold. Judges hate surprises, especially those that call into question the integrity of their courtroom. By noon, word had already leaked. An old contact from the courthouse texted me. Something big just landed in Judge Merriman's chambers. Your wife is pacing the halls. I smiled, not smug, just satisfied. At 1:45 p.m., the first public crack appeared. An unscheduled recess called mid-witness. A ripple through the legal community, text flying, email surging. By 3 o'clock, the local courthouse reporter posted a cryptic tweet. Major disruption in State versus Crane trial. Sources suggest serious questions raised about key expert witness. I watched it all unfold from my den. Didn't text anyone. Didn't call. Just observed. Helen came home late, nearly 9 p.m. I was seated in the kitchen, casually nursing another cup of coffee. She entered with a face I hadn't seen in years, tight, pale, frantic. Rough day. I asked, tone neutral. She froze. I started. You, hurt? Of course. She exhaled shakily, dropped her bag on the counter. They called an emergency ethics review. The judge is furious. I don't understand how they got this. I sipped my coffee. Maybe you underestimated who was watching. Her eyes widened, the first flicker of understanding dawning. Asterisk, Robert. She whispered, but I rose, placing the cup gently in the sink. Save it, I said calmly. You always told me to trust my instincts. I did. And with that, I left the room. No shouting. No accusation. Just fact. The next morning sealed the play. At 9:10 a.m., as final arguments were set to begin, Judge Merriman reconvened the court with an unscheduled statement. In light of credible evidence presented to this court, it is my determination that Dr. Helen Grayson's testimony in this matter cannot be considered impartial or ethically sound. Her testimony is hereby stricken from the record. The courtroom buzzed erupted. Reporters flew out the door. Rollins attempted a brief protest, denied. Trial postponed. Media frenzy ignited. Star witness compromised in Crane trial. Psychologist exposed in ethics scandal. Defense attorney, expert witness relationship raises serious questions of misconduct. By noon, Helen's career was on fire. By 5 p.m., she was suspended from the bar's approved expert witness list pending full investigation. By 8 p.m., every major outlet carried her name, not as a trusted expert, but as a cautionary tale. At home that evening, I was already packed. 1 suitcase, 1 duffel. Clean, simple. Helen returned, eyes raw from tears. Robert, please. I can explain. I shook my head. You've explained enough. To the whole damn state. I left a single envelope on the bed, my final message. You always told me to trust my instincts. I did. No signature required. As I stepped out into the cold night air, duffel over my shoulder, I felt no anger. Only clarity. Because after 40 years in law enforcement, I knew this. Justice is not loud. It is not vengeful. It is precise. And sometimes, the hardest cases, the most personal betrayals, demand the simplest solutions. Truth. Evidence. Exposure. Helen had played with fire. I simply ensured the world saw the smoke. The strange thing about pulling a trigger is what happens afterward. I built my entire career around cause and effect. Evidence in, justice out. But this was different. I wasn't wearing a badge this time. I wasn't working a case for the department. I wasn't after an arrest. I was after a message. And I delivered it. Now it was the fallout that mattered. Helen's exposure in open court had already triggered the first wave. News vans camped outside the courthouse. The media feasted, a scandal involving both the defense team and a star expert witness. That was blood in the water. Every legal pundit worth their salt piled on. Textbook ethics violation. If proven, this could permanently disqualify Dr. Grayson from expert testimony. Serious questions about the integrity of the entire defense strategy. Helen's carefully curated reputation unraveled by the hour. And I simply watched. No calls. No responses to the few texts I did receive, former colleagues checking in, a few mutual friends fishing for the story. I owed no one an explanation, especially not Helen. By the second morning, her face hit the front page of the Metro Times. Psychologist's testimony stricken amid affair allegations. She came home late again, drained, pale, raw. I was already halfway packed. "Robert, you can't just leave." "Watch me," I said, folding another shirt. "Please, I'll fix this. I'll clear my name. We can talk then." I stopped folding, looked her square in the eye. "No," I said. "You had your chance to be honest. You used our marriage as a cover. Now the world sees it. And so do I." She shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You don't understand, Rollins. It wasn't supposed to. Don't insult me with that," I cut in. "You wanted out. You wanted new. You chose your moment. I chose mine." And that was all there was left to say. I zipped my duffel, slung it over my shoulder. At the door, she blocked me, voice trembling. "Where are you going?" "Someplace honest." I left the final envelope on her pillow as I passed. "You always told me to trust my instincts." I did. That was it. I walked out without looking back. The next week unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. The bar opened a formal investigation into Rollins and into Helen's conduct as a registered expert. She was suspended pending review. Rollins issued a damage control statement, an unfortunate personal lapse, unrelated to case strategy. No one bought it. The prosecution moved for a mistrial. The judge granted it. The entire case reset, an outcome worse than any conviction or acquittal. Crane's team, once so smug, now scrambled. And Helen? She disappeared from the circuit. Gone were the booked seminars, the speaking engagements, the polished interviews. Her once busy social media accounts fell silent. I followed none of it directly. Just the occasional glance confirming the obvious. She was done. And I rented a small cabin 2 towns over. Quiet, clean. Just enough space for me and the dog. No press. No drama. One evening, about a month later, I received a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside, a single note, scrawled in hurried script. "I'm sorry. Please. Can we talk?" No signature needed. I burned it in the fireplace that night. Because here's the truth. Some lies you can forgive. Others define who a person truly is. Helen's betrayal wasn't the affair. It was the hypocrisy standing in a courtroom, swearing to tell the truth, while living a lie. You don't recover from that. Not in my world. Not in the world that built me. I resumed my routines. Fishing in the mornings. Reading in the afternoons. Long walks with the dog at dusk. Life shrank in the best way to what mattered. And one evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I found myself smiling for the first time in a long while. Because justice had been served. Not in a courtroom. Not with a badge. But with patience. With precision. With the instincts that never lied, even when the people closest to me did. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, I knew one thing with perfect certainty. Some betrayals demand punishment. But the rare ones, the ones that cut deepest, deserve something more. Exposure. Complete. Public. Irrevocable. Helen's final testimonial was not on the witness stand. It was in the headlines. And that, to me, was justice. It's a strange thing, watching a life unravel from a distance. In my line of work, I'd seen it countless times. A suspect thinking they've outsmarted the system, only to watch the walls close in. You can almost time the stages. Denial. Outrage. Desperation. Collapse. Helen hit every beat. After I walked out that night, bag packed, message left, I checked into a quiet business-class hotel downtown. No frills, no questions. Just space. Space was what I needed. Space is also what Helen didn't have. By the next morning, the full blast of the media had turned on her. Headlines screamed ethics violations. Legal analysts dissected every move. And because this was the age of the internet, her private life became everyone's entertainment. The morning talk shows loved it. Psychologist love affair with defense attorney cripples high-profile case. Trusted court expert caught in secret relationship. Marital betrayal, legal scandal. When courtroom drama turns personal. You'd think they'd scripted it. By noon that day, my phone buzzed. An old friend, a former journalist I'd worked with on cold cases, sent a message. She's spiraling. Multiple outlets are circling for exclusives. I suggest you keep your head down. No problem there. The temptation to gloat, to issue some kind of triumphant statement, wasn't in me. That wasn't why I'd done this. Exposure wasn't about applause. It was about accuracy. Helen had built her career on credibility, the trusted voice dissecting criminal minds for juries and judges alike. And I had exposed the truth. She wasn't credible. Not anymore. But the fallout wasn't limited to the courtroom. That evening, the bar issued a preliminary statement. Pending formal review, Dr. Helen Grayson is hereby suspended from the State Bar's list of approved expert witnesses. No hearings yet. No verdict. But the damage was done. In our circles, legal, law enforcement, judicial, such a suspension was a professional death sentence. Attorneys wouldn't touch her now. Judges would steer clear. No one wants their case tainted by association. The phone call started soon after. First a voicemail from her sister, panicked, angry. "Robert, what the hell did you do? Helen's in pieces. If you have any decency left, call me back." I didn't. Then a more measured call from one of her professional colleagues. "Robert, I don't know the whole story, but if you're the source of this, you've made your point. Please, step back now." Again, no response. Because the point wasn't about making noise. It was about precision. Helen's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was professional. It was systemic. And now it was visible. 3 days later, Helen tried direct contact. A text first. "Robert, please. Can we talk? I need to explain." Then a voicemail. "Robert, I know you think you understand everything, but it wasn't what it looked like. Please, let me tell you my side. Don't do this to me. We can fix this. Please." There it was, desperation. Stage 3. I deleted both. The truth was simple. Helen had already given her side, in her own words, recorded and documented. I hate every minute of it. But once it's over, once we win, it's done. We'll be free. Those weren't the words of a woman trapped or confused. They were the words of a woman actively plotting against the court, against the truth, against me. That was the line she crossed. And there was no path back. By the end of the first week, the media cycle began to shift. New scandals emerged. The Crane trial was no longer front page, but the damage had been done. Helen was now radioactive in legal circles. I heard through channels that her publisher had pulled her upcoming book, The Criminal Mind Unveiled, citing unresolved ethical concerns. Speaking engagements? Canceled. Pending consulting contracts? Quietly voided. Her name was now a risk no firm wanted to touch. And Rollins? Last I heard, he'd taken a leave of absence from his firm, internal review pending. The sharks smelled blood. They'd carve him up soon enough. Good. But my focus wasn't on him. It never had been. This was Helen's lesson to learn. I checked out of the hotel after a week. Moved to a small, furnished rental on the edge of town. A place with no memories. I needed that. Then came the final move. A letter. Handwritten. No stamp. Slipped under the door late one night. "Robert. Please. I know you're angry. I know you think I betrayed everything. But I need you to understand. I was lost. The pressure of the trial, the connection with James, it just happened. I didn't plan it. I didn't want to hurt you. Please, meet me. Let me explain. I'll do anything. Just don't let this be the end of us. Helen." I read it twice, then burned it in the fireplace. Because some betrayals can't be explained away. And forgiveness isn't owed when the sin was so calculated. Weeks passed. The noise died down. The bar's investigation remained open, but insiders whispered that permanent disbarment from expert work was all but guaranteed. Helen vanished from public view. No more texts. No more voicemails. Just silence. And in that silence, I found peace. Because here's the truth. Justice isn't about winning. It's about balance. And when someone tips that balance, uses trust as a shield while plotting behind it, the scales must be reset. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because truth matters. Because in a world of smoke and mirrors, someone has to strike the match that burns it all down. Helen played her game. I played mine. And when the final testimonial was written, hers wasn't on a courtroom transcript. It was on the front page. Exactly as it should be. You don't often get clean endings in my line of work. Most cases leave residue. A bad taste in the mouth. Loose ends that tug at you when the night gets too quiet. But every so often, the board clears. The pieces lie still, and you know the game is finished. This was one of those times. Weeks passed. I settled into the small rental on the edge of town, a modest place overlooking the river, where the only noises at night were wind and water. A cop's idea of peace. I filled the days with habit. Morning walks, long hours at the range to keep my aim sharp, chess games at the local VFW. Helen faded from the public eye, just as I'd expected. The bar investigation proceeded methodically, no leaks, no drama. But the circles we'd both moved in weren't waiting for a verdict. They'd already passed their own. Helen's name was scorched earth. Law firms quietly severed ties. Judges flagged her in their internal lists, do not recommend, do not call. The speaking circuit, once her second home, dried up overnight. A few desperate outlets tried to spin human interest stories. Fallen star psychologist speaks out. I was misunderstood. Affair was a mistake, not a crime, says Grayson. But the public wasn't buying. Not when her own words, caught on tape, made the truth plain. Once we win, it's done. We'll be free. Intent matters. And hers had been proven. About 2 months after the fallout, I got a call from a familiar number. Judge Merriman. We'd worked together for years, her as a rising judge, me as lead investigator on more cases than I could count. I picked up. Robert, Your Honor, you're not supposed to be involved in this, she said, dry humor in her voice. But off the record, thank you. I didn't do it for thanks. No, you did it for the truth. And the system needed it. A pause. She'll be disqualified. Permanent recommendation forthcoming. Understood. Take care of yourself, detective. You too, Judge. We hung up. No more words needed. The book was closed. Helen tried one last time. 3 months after I'd walked out, an envelope arrived at the rental, no return address, but her handwriting plain as day. I opened it. A final letter. Robert. I know you won't answer. I don't blame you. I just want you to know that I've lost everything. The career I built. The respect I earned. You. All of it. I was foolish. I was weak. I let something meaningless become everything. And now I have nothing. If there's any part of you that can forgive, even a sliver, please. I have no one else. Helen. I read it once. Then fed it to the fire, same as the first. Because here's the truth. Forgiveness isn't owed. Not when the betrayal is so cold, so calculated, that it strikes at the core of who you are. Helen hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She betrayed the principles we both built our careers on. Truth. Integrity. Trust. She chose ambition and desire over all of them. And I'd chosen to make sure the world saw it. Life moved forward. I bought a small cabin in the mountains, permanent this time. No need to rent. A place with clean air, clean views, no ghosts. A few former colleagues visited now and then. We shared war stories, drank too much whiskey, laughed at old memories. None of them asked about Helen. They didn't need to. The story had traveled far enough. In time, the bar ruling was made public. Permanent disqualification from serving as an expert witness in the state. Formal censure for ethics violations. Her name, once a fixture in legal circles, was now a cautionary tale. And Rollins? Word had it he took early retirement, fled west. His reputation had cratered almost as badly. 2 lives, careers built on perception, toppled by the simple weight of truth. I didn't revel in it, but I didn't regret it, either. Justice had been served. One clear fall morning, walking the trail behind my cabin, I stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley. Sunrise painting the trees gold. Crisp air in my lungs. And I thought of something Helen once said, years ago, after we'd both testified on a brutal homicide case. The truth always wins, Robert. But sometimes it needs help finding the light. She'd been right. And this time, I'd given it that light. Clean. Surgical. No need for bitterness, no hunger for applause. Just the facts. Exposed. The only way a cop knows how to operate. I took a breath, deep and steady. And as the wind whispered through the pines, I smiled. Case closed. Not every case ends with handcuffs. Some end with silence. The kind of silence that tells you the message was received loud and clear. That was how I knew this case, this personal case, was over. I didn't need a gavel drop or a final verdict. The world had seen the evidence. The bar had passed its judgment. And the circles Helen once moved in had moved on without her. I spent my days in the mountains that fall. Simple rhythms. Early walks with the dog. Fishing in the river below the cabin. Chopping wood, reading, making meals with no clock ticking. It's a life most men never get to taste. And maybe I wouldn't have, if not for the fire Helen had lit, and the match I'd struck in response. One morning, weeks after the final bar ruling was made public, I received a call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. But instinct said to. Robert. Her voice was raw. Thinner than I'd ever heard it. Helen. A pause, thick with everything unsaid. I know you don't want to hear from me. I just wanted to tell you that I'm moving. Out of state. There's nothing left for me here. Another pause. I waited. You were right, she said finally, voice cracking. I betrayed everything. I thought I was smarter. I thought I could control it. But you exposed me. You made me face it. I deserve that. I said nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just, I needed you to know. I'm sorry. Still, I said nothing. Some moments don't need words. She breathed out slowly. Goodbye, Robert. And hung up. I set the phone down. Sat back. No triumph. No anger. Just a quiet satisfaction. Because the truth had done its work. A week later, walking through town, I passed the courthouse. A younger detective I knew from my department days crossed my path. Heard about what happened, he said. Hell of a thing. Sometimes the truth takes a while to land, I replied. He nodded. You handled it right. Clean. Surgical. I smiled faintly. That's the only way. Because here's the thing, I hadn't destroyed Helen's life. She had. All I'd done was let the light in, so the world could see it. That's not revenge. That's justice. The months passed. Helen faded from headlines, as all stories do. A new scandal replaced the old. The media's appetite moved on. But in the circles that mattered, legal, law enforcement, judicial, her name remained etched in one word. Disgraced. No book tours. No courtroom testimony. No elegant lectures. Just a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. Don't end up like Grayson. And me? I lived. Simple. Clean. I rebuilt friendships I'd let drift. Reconnected with old partners. Took a trip out west with my brother, first vacation in years. No shadows followed me. Because I'd carried no bitterness through that fire. Only purpose. One cold winter evening, snow falling light against the cabin windows, I found myself reading an old case file, muscle memory, I guess. At the back of the folder, a quote I'd once copied from a judge I respected. Justice is not the roar of the crowd. It is the steady beat of truth, measured and patient. I closed the folder. Sat back. That was it. That was this story. Measured. Patient. True. Helen would rebuild, somewhere far away. Or she wouldn't. That wasn't my concern. My ledger was clean. Sometimes people ask if I regret it. If I'd have preferred to keep the marriage intact, to salvage the life we built. And here's my answer. You don't build a future on a lie. You don't share a home with someone who looks you in the eye by day and plots your betrayal by night. And you sure as hell don't ignore your instincts when they tell you the truth. Helen taught me that, one final, bitter lesson. Trust your instincts, she always said. I did. And in doing so, I regained the one thing no person should ever sacrifice for the sake of comfort. Integrity. The fire in the hearth crackled low. I poured a glass of scotch. Sat by the window, watching the snow. Somewhere out there, Helen was starting over. I wished her no ill. But I wished her no peace, either. Let the weight of her choices travel with her. As for me, my peace was earned. Not through vengeance. Through exposure. Through truth. Through the steady, cold patience of a man who had walked through darker fires than this. And come out clean. Case closed. The end. Subscribe to the channel